Hey guys, Constance here from Cosmopolitan Cornbread's Homestead. So today I just want to talk to you about a little thing that has been bugging me lately. So I recently joined a couple of Facebook groups for canning, and I know, before you say anything, why did I go and join more Facebook groups? Who has time for Facebook groups? I don't have time for Facebook groups. I know. What was I thinking? So I went and I joined a couple of these groups, and I'm seeing some posts pop up in my Facebook feed when I get on there. And people are getting all bent out of shape because they're talking about things that they're canning and ways that they're canning them. And then other people are jumping in and warning them that what they're doing isn't safe. And then the person who's posting the stuff is like chewing them out and getting all defensive and all this stuff. Look, you guys, canning is not like regular cooking, okay? Let's talk about this. Canning is not like regular cooking. Canning isn't just willy-nilly throw things together and see how it happens. Canning is a science. Canning is technique. And I'm not talking about the stuff that people are dreaming up these fairy tales and slapping the label science on them and shoving them down your throat. No, I'm talking about actual science, okay? Don't be a science denier, alright? I see things like, well, this is how my grandma canned her green beans, and if this was good enough for grandma, it's good enough for me. Well, you know what? Look, grandma and grandpa had some mad skills, okay? They knew how to do stuff we could only dream of doing. There's a lot of things that we can learn from Grandma and Grandpa about. But there are things that maybe Grandma and Grandpa didn't know to do any better. You know? I mean, think about it. A couple generations ago, it was perfectly acceptable for women to swallow tapeworms to lose weight and get that hourglass figure. And a couple generations ago, it seemed perfectly fine to take, I don't know, heroin and laudanum for pain. And what ended up happening, we had all these addicts. Not by their own fault, they just didn't know any better. So that's kind of how it is with canning. Canning, like I said, is a science. And the way you might have canned something 40 years ago might not necessarily be the way you want to can things today. For instance, did you know that a lot of our tomatoes and things like that genetically are different than the tomatoes we canned 40 years ago? Now, if you're raising heirloom tomatoes, you might have a better chance of them being, closer to the originals, back then. But it's getting harder and harder to find stuff like that. So you have to pay very close attention to the techniques, the instructions, the guidelines for canning. When my grandparents were alive, both of my grandmothers canned. They both did an amazing job. They always had these huge stock pantries. And my grandma Ingalls did a lot of jelly canning, and all of her canning was sealed closed with paraffin wax. Well, that was perfectly acceptable then, but nowadays we know that that's not necessarily the safest thing to do. You know what I'm saying? So when someone gets on there and they talk about how, well, I don't have to pressure can my green beans because my grandma didn't do it that way and she was just fine. Well, you know what? You might pull the trigger on a revolver playing Russian roulette a couple of times and be fine too, but it only takes one. The last person here in the state of Alabama who died from botulism was from a bad batch of green beans. So that's not something you want to play around with. You don't want to play around literally with your life or the life of your family. And I mean, not just health-wise, but do you want to spend all the work growing all this stuff out here in your garden, all of the time, the energy, the sweat, the blood, the tears, only to have it wasted because you didn't can it right, because maybe you thought you knew better? I'm just saying, I'm not trying to hurt anybody's feelings, but you really got to be safe. I have lots of canning books. I have some very, very old canning books, like, gosh, like when they first started making like when Ball was a brand new company. It might be one of the first editions of their blue book. But I will pay attention to how things change. This is the newest book that I have. It is the Made by Ball, the Complete Book of Home Preserving. And this has all the guidelines in there. It tells you very simply how to can everything. You know, there's some things that you can modify. You know, for instance, if you want to change out one pepper for a different kind of pepper and things like that, for the most part that's not going to make a huge difference. You know, I swap out peppers in my salsa and stuff like that. But when it comes to the canning technique itself, you've got to follow the guidelines. You know, lots of things you can just throw together and do what you want with. I do that all the time. I make up my own recipes. But when it comes to canning, you have to be very, very careful. Because it doesn't take a very big mistake for you to have a very serious situation on your hands. So that is just what I wanted to say. I'm astounded by the reaction that some people have in these groups. You know, people not properly canning things. Why do you want to risk your health? Why do you want to risk losing all this stuff that you worked for? It just makes no sense. So get yourself a good canning book. Get yourself proper supplies. Make sure you sterilize things. I mean, me personally, I know they say you don't have to sterilize when you're pressure canning, but to be honest with you, what does it hurt? I mean, the jar's got to be hot anyways. Why not sterilize them? And I know I don't have to do that step, but I just do it anyways. You know, always better safe than sorry. That's how I look at it. So, anyways, please be safe, you guys. Read up. Educate yourself, make sure you're doing things the proper way, not necessarily the way Grandma did, bless her. I love my grandma, and I wish I had a lot of the skills that she had, but make sure you're doing things the way you're supposed to. Be safe, and don't waste your harvest.